I'll call the meeting to order. And let's ask first for the roll call, please.
Angela Ebener, are you on the line? Oh, well, yes.
So we have
Dr. Burke, are you, Dr. Burke?
Yes.
Councilmember Buscaino?
Yes. Here.
Senator Delgado?
She'll be late.
Supervisor Perez?
Right here.
Supervisor Rutherford? Here. Councilmember Mitchell?
Yes, here. Thank you. Okay, we'll get started with our legislative updates. And first up will be Cassidy and Associates. And we have Angela Ebener, I believe, on the line to speak to us and give us an update on your report. Angela, are you there?
Yes, I am. Happy New Year, everybody. So the big news of this month is obviously impeachment. The senators were sworn in yesterday, and the impeachment trial will begin on Tuesday, January 21st. We expect it to last a few weeks. I'm sure some of you have seen the headlines about the Lev Parnas interview. We're not sure how that will impact the sort of momentum of the trial. Remains to be seen, but seems like there's surprises all the time. The Senate passed the new NAFTA agreement this week. The House has already passed it, so that's moving along. And then wanted to flag that we're expecting the House Democrats to unveil their infrastructure bill, sort of the surface transportation legislation, and it seems like McConnell is trying to get his chamber to put their surface transportation bill on the floor. So we may see some movement with infrastructure in the next few weeks. And finally, the House Democrats also released a broad outline of their climate bill, and that included a big boost for DERA and also addressed NOx. I think that's it for us.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. We'll move on to Kadish and Associates. Mark Kadish, I believe, is with us. Good morning, Mark. Happy New Year.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Just a brief update. Our report, as I'm sure you've all seen, kind of wrapped up the FY20 numbers for most of the issues and appropriations we were following. Going forward, we are expecting the president to release his budget. Given what Angela just talked about, the impeachment proceedings, there's already rumor that the president's budget may be delayed from early February to late February, but we'll continue to monitor that and obviously work with your staff to look at what the president's numbers are for those programs that we've been following and working on for the last several years. And also, as Angela mentioned, the infrastructure bill or the surface transportation reauthorization is moving forward in the House, and we've been working with Derek, Lisa, and your staff to look for opportunities in that legislation, and we'll come back to you, we hope, shortly. As Angela mentioned, we expect to see a draft of that bill at the end of the month, and are working with kind of our Southern California committee members on some issues that may be useful as we go forward on air quality. So that is our report. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Mark. We'll move on to Carmen Group and Gary Oitzma. Good morning, Gary. Can you give us an update on your report, please?
Yeah, good morning. Good morning, everyone. My quick update deals with the Cleaner Trucks Initiative, which is the EPA rulemaking process on the ultra-low NOx rule. As expected, the EPA signed off on the advance notice of proposed rulemaking last week and put out a pre-publication version of it so you can see it there. And it will be, it's basically a solicitation of comments be a 30-day timeline after the rule is published in the Federal Register, which could be next week we're looking at. One other tidbit I picked up from the Senate Environment Public Works Committee staff is indicating that they could do a hearing on the Cleaner Trucks initiative, sort of an informational hearing because of the stakeholder interest and the member interest in this topic. It's not decided yet, but they're interested in input on whether that would be a constructive thing to do. So I just passed that along. That's my quick update today. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Gary? We have no questions for you. So we'll move on to our state representatives. From California Advisors, Ross Buckley. Can you give us an update on what's happening in Sacramento, Ross? Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Last week was a big week in Sacramento. The legislators returned from their interim break on Monday morning. They had 3 months off, and then on Friday, the governor released his proposed 2020-2021 budget, which included $153 billion of spending and would increase our state reserves to over $20 billion. This really kicks off the budget negotiations that will culminate on June 15th when the budget must be passed. And that's my quick update. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any questions? Questions about the budget? Okay, we'll move on to Gonzalez and Sons. Paul Gonzalez is on the line, I believe. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning, Madam Chair, and Happy New Year to everyone. I'll just pick up quickly where to fill in a little bit of the blanks where Ross left off. He did a great job summarizing the governor's budget. In the budget, there's about $12.5 billion over 5 years to address climate resistance in a number of different ways. There's a $1 billion Climate Catalyst Fund, which is a 4-year program that will provide low-interest loans. There's a $4.75 billion climate resistance bond included in the proposal, along with just shy of $1 billion in cap and trade funding that they're going to be taking out the door. So, as Ross mentioned, it's the kickoff to budget negotiations. We'll see the legislature through the budget committee and subcommittee process make revisions to it. Those revisions will be reflected in the May revise, and then a June 15th budget will be thereafter. And they will pass the budget by June 15th, and I will remind the committee that if they don't, they do not receive a paycheck. So we will expect to see a budget on June 15th. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. We do have some input here from our CEO, Mr. Nesby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to comment because I want to be very clear. The governor's budget that was released last week is not good for us. There were major cuts in our programs, including AB 617, which was originally funded at $245 million and is now down to $200 million. Now, this could all just be the governor's position with regards to working with the legislature, but it's not a good sign. And there was a briefing last Friday with the governor's office. We participated in that. I can tell you that on the day of the briefing, the day of the actual release of the budget, there was already criticism from other groups on programs like 617, the cut in funding. And what we've been telling ARB is that you can't give us more work without providing more funds. And so it was really disappointing from our perspective, and I just want to make sure that you as the board members all have that opportunity to understand that we're going to have to go in and fight really hard for funding. So I just wanted to be clear. Thanks.
Okay. So we need to talk to our legislators.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Can I?
Yes.
Madam Chair?
Sure. Yes. Supervisor, go ahead.
Yeah. So, where do you think this is coming from? Like, what's the motivation, and what's the criticism maybe from CARB or others regarding the 617 or the fact that we're being cut? What's going on? I mean, this has got to come from somewhere, and so I'm just trying to understand what's the motivation.
Maybe some of our Sacramento people could talk about this.
I think it's this is Derek. I think it's an opening salvo for negotiations with the Assembly and the Senate. What the governor is doing, trying to show that he's, fiscally, concerned. But ultimately, as you know, Supervisor, you were up in the Assembly, you know how it works, and the legislature, tweaks it and puts in funds programs or takes away funding from what is important to them. And, it's all part of the negotiations, all that the Sacramento consultants add to that. But
And maybe before the consultants add to it, I just want to add, Supervisor, 617 in particular was not this governor's program. He inherited this program. And I think he's been focused on wildfires, he's been focused on homelessness. And so he has his initiatives, his issues that he's focusing. It was the legislature that had made the commitment to fund 617. And I think he's trying to put that pressure back on the legislature. But to me, as our air agency, we've talked about the potential impact of sanctions. And to me, it shows a lack of investment and a lack of understanding in terms of where those funds need to go and the challenge that we face and the consequences that we face without those proper investments. So I would welcome any of the consultants to add any additional comments.
Yeah, this is Ross Buckley, California Advisors. I'll reiterate that I agree with everything that Wayne and Derek just mentioned, but especially when you look at the cap and trade program, you've seen tremendous amounts of stress from the legislators trying to, get their special program or their special needs funded. Even last year, we saw the, hundreds of millions of dollars that got taken away for clean water. So this is also a funding source that's, people are clamoring to get into.
Yes, Dr.
All right.
Burke?
Well, look,
Go ahead, Supervisor.
I think what we got to first figure out is what's the motivation behind all this so that we can target where this is coming from, in my opinion. And obviously our lobbyists, our advocates that work for us in Sacramento, I think we got to push them, to better understand that. And obviously we got to walk those halls in Sacramento to push our agenda. But first and foremost, let's find out where this is coming from. And you may be right, Wayne, that this is not our governor's program and it started before him. That might be the case. So if that's the case, then how do we make it his? Right? How do we turn that around? Or maybe that's not correct entirely. Maybe it's something else. But we got to try to get to the root reason why this is happening for us to figure out our strategy. And with that being said, I'm going to ask our advocates, our lobbyists that work for us to try to figure that out for us. And then we, as AQMD board members, we got to go out there with staff and advocate and find out who our champion is. We got to identify our champion to help us move this forward so we can gain back those dollars that we're going to be potentially losing. So I just want to put that out there.
Very good plan. Thank you.
Supervisor Perez, this is Paul Gonzalez. If I may, your message is well received. It's definitely part of the plan. I know from the consultants when we do our biweekly meetings together where we kind of strategize on moving forward, that is definitely part of the conversation. So we'll continue to make that push and keep you and the entire board up to speed and apprised as the issue progresses.
That sounds great. Give us some ideas, what your action plan looks like, your timelines. Let's go.
And also let us know who our champions are up there. Who are the legislators that we ought to be contacting and visiting? So that would be useful too.
I have to say this about our consultants. It bothers me that we find this out like reading it in the newspaper. These cuts weren't done in a closet. They were done in a process. And if we're paying people who have supposed to have knowledge of the process and what's going on, I'm a little sensitive to finding this out when everybody else finds it out. I think we should be ahead of the power curve in finding this information out so we can do exactly like Supervisor Perez says. Go to the proper pressure points and then hit them. The other thing that bothers me is that I think that, as I said in closed session the other day, this has nothing to do with closed session, so I can say it. When I text my daughter the other day, she made reference to the lack of power they have in Northern California and what was it, fires and the fires that they're dealing with. So I don't think that, number one, Southern California, or number two, air quality is on the governor's mind. And I personally, I have no relationship with the governor on any kind of personal level. So I don't know how we get in to plead our case.
That's a good point, Dr. Burke. Look, no knock on our advocates, lobbyists. Although I hear you, Dr. Burke, and I agree with you, we should have been ahead of the curve here. But look, there's still time. This is early.
Oh, sure.
So all I'm saying right now, folks, is like, let's get on this. And on top of that, let's schedule a meeting with the governor. Let's make our presence known. Let's go sit down and let's talk about AQMD and let's talk about air quality. And I'm going to ask our lobbyists up there to make that work, make that happen.
It makes all the sense in the world.
Yes, thank you for that very valuable input. Does anybody else have any comments to make as we sit here about the plans for the future? We have another consultant in Sacramento. It's David Quintano is on the line. So good morning, David. Happy New Year to you. Can you give us your update, please?
Happy New Year, Madam Chairwoman. Yes, I have nothing to add to the paper that I submitted, nor to the discussion, the full discussion that has just occurred.
Okay. Any further comments or questions on the topics, the legislative topic? Okay. Okay, we'll go to the next item on our agenda, which is a report from Derek on what is happening with SB 732 and where we are with our legislation. I know there's been a number of meetings on this since the beginning of January, right? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. Latest update on our SB 732, the voting district authorization, is we have received some bill language from stakeholders, and we've actually already put it into the bill. It's already online with their language. We are still working with stakeholders to get their support based on this short period of time between now and when our bill was going to be heard in a Senate Appropriations. We decided to pull the bill, and we're going to reintroduce it in February. Gives us a little bit more time to continue to negotiate with stakeholders for their support, and so we can move this bill forward.
I might want to be a little more explicit.
I will get more specific. So the building trades gave us language on Tuesday night, and we were able to get it in the bill language. We're still working with the building trades to get their support. They are very instrumental in Sacramento to the success of our bill, and whether we get their support or they take a no position on the bill, then that'll help us move the bill forward. We're also going to be looking at a new author for the bill. We have some ideas of new authors for the bill, and we're going to be actively courting them to get them to author the new bill. I could be specific and talk about those top three. So the top three would be Senator Marlena Durazo. It would be Assembly Member Wendy Carrillo, and then also Senator Connie Leyva, and then also Senator Gutierrez, Lena Gonzalez. Those are really top four authors that we're going to be courting to try to introduce a new bill. Senator Allen does want to stay active on the bill, so he'll probably be a co-author of the bill, but we need a lead author. With that, I'm available to answer any questions.
Any questions?
Sorry, I joined finally.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry that I was late. Yeah, but I think Lena would make an excellent sponsor. She's, I think, still looking for things to champion. So happy to help with that discussion. And then Maria Elena Durazo has been supportive of other things that I've done. So I think she also would be very receptive. Happy to help with either conversation.
Thank you, Senator. Any comments, Janice?
On the Senator Leyva front, she obviously represents mostly San Bernardino County, and with the SBCTA as opposed as they are to this bill, I would think that would be a rather heavy lift. In looking at the language of the last version that Senator Allen had, that just, by the way, I got from my county lobbyist because AQMD never provided it to us. Is this still the core language? We're moving forward to a new author with tweaks as you negotiate with the trades?
So I think we're pretty much done negotiating with the trades. We're going to tweak it a little bit because there's some discussion that we can't introduce the same bill that was already previously introduced in the same session. So we may tweak it a little bit, a couple of words here. We already have some input from Environmental Defense Fund, their language, we haven't put it in there. We inputted language that we got from the longshoremen, and they're supportive. They're automatically supportive of the bill. It was they had automation issues, so they were happy we put that language in there. But we may tweak it just a little bit, but it's not going to be very substantive.
I'm glad you're happy the longshoremen are happy. I think it's outrageous that we're saying straight out in the bill there are areas that we are not going to pursue clean air policies with. I have a problem. We have no sunset language, which is something this committee has discussed before. Is the intention that the measure itself have sunsets rather than the authorization?
We believe there's, the feedback we got in Sacramento is there should be a sunset, but the sunset is up for negotiation. So I think that's what, we're going to talk to, board members about what the sunset. We also have to take a look at, there's another in 2037, there's another mandate that we have to meet. So depending on what that is and how long we're going to need the money for to meet that additional third mandate.
Yeah, I would just add that as far as the sunset, it's something we're all aware of. We're definitely considering that from most of the members that we spoke with. They all talk about that. And so we just assumed that that would be part of the negotiations. We never got to the point where we actually had anything to negotiate. And so it is definitely at the forefront. And should we actually get out of a committee or get it to a committee hearing, that'll be at the top.
We also don't have any language in here about return to source, which has been a topic of conversation previously.
And when you say return to source, you mean the
How
spending
do we
plan?
guarantee that the inland areas get their share of this money and that it's not all spent in South Los Angeles?
Well, we've put together a draft spending plan that we've shared that shows that. I don't think we can actually put together a detailed spending plan because we just don't know the nature of the technology and the deployment of some of the trucks and things like that. But that is the commitment, and I think that's something that the oversight panel would also have a role in.
It's just going to be an area of concern that they're, and if we don't get it in the bill and the bill goes and we get an actual measure, then we're going to have to be real careful about how we word the measure.
The challenge I see from the measure is twofold. One, unless the board wants to actually put forward the measure, in which case then it has the control, and I'm going to look to Barbara to make sure I'm right on this. Or if two, others take up the ability to have their own measure.
With that latter being the possibility, we've got to have that protection in the bill itself. Because if somebody out of LA is putting a measure together, that gives no comfort to those of us to the east. This happens to us over and over and over. And you think that my folks are opposed to it now? Just wait till you see something that doesn't guarantee that we get any of the money.
I think that's a valid suggestion.
Thank you.
I think that's a good suggestion that we should take a look at.
I was wondering if you could explain the changes that have been made on how the money gets spent to the extent it's in the bill. We had some very vague language that it was to achieve state and federal ambient air quality standards and to accelerate deployment of technology. And that language is changed in the last version that I'm seeing. And I'm wondering if you could explain why we went with different language and whether that's going to carry over or whether that's still a source of negotiating. So we went from this to this.
Philip?
Yeah. And I mean, I think that our focus really has been making sure that number one, our air quality management plans, 2016, 2022, and into the future get funded and implemented first. That's our first and foremost priority. But also wanted to make clear that, obviously there's benefits for things like disadvantaged communities, toxic exposure, greenhouse gas emission reduction, clean transportation and transit projects. There was requests that we had from stakeholders to make it clear in the bill that there were other kind of related areas that the funding could go towards. That was the intent of the language that we put in that is still more relatively broad, but it allows to say funding goes here first, this is the primary function, but there are other key areas that it could be going towards to benefit the region.
So in a sense, Supervisor, it was designed to address some of the concerns that we heard from some of the other members, particularly in disadvantaged communities, that they wanted to make sure that some of that funding was going to be there. Of course, we're going to be spending money just because of the nature of our region. The same goes true when you're looking at some of the other aspects that were associated there. The GHG component that Philip referred, when you look at all of the funding and you look at the governor's budget, climate is a major part. And most of the members will say it has to say climate. And I think the way that we view it, we tend to be a little nerdy, bureaucratic, I'll admit, in the separation of air quality and climate. But if you get to the ultimate zero emissions, you're getting both climate and air quality benefit. And so for us, it's sort of an acceptance of we've got to be able to address climate because of the broader public concerns and member concerns that climate's the real driver, even though from our view, it's all about air quality. So that reflects part of the changes that you see there, but it still is true from my perspective to the original intent that we had previously.
Let me just say that I think the State Air Board may have problems with, we don't have jurisdiction over climate, and so that has to be certainly addressed and worked out. I mean, some of the things we do are certainly, all the emission reductions that we enter into do affect climate as well. We've always had these co-benefits in mind, but that issue came up with the Bay Area Air District. They wanted to enact a rule that affected climate, and they pretty much were told, no, you don't have jurisdiction over climate.
That was all part of the 617 GHG renewal. But for us, and we just met with Richard Corey with ARB and their senior staff, all of CAPCOA, and we talked about this very issue, climate and criteria pollutants. And they agreed that perhaps they haven't focused as much as they should have on the air quality. But what we all agree on is that when you get to zero emissions, you're addressing both. And so that is our ultimate goal. For us, though, getting to zero emissions can't necessarily get in the way of getting 90% reductions now as opposed to several years from now. And that's where we're having the discussion with ARB in the variation. But we all agree that we can do both climate and criteria pollutants.
But I'm going to be real scared about language that says this can go to carry out transit and transportation projects that reduce air pollution. There are so many examples of money intended for one thing that gets stolen and misdirected out of Sacramento. And if we don't keep this incredibly tight, and it does pass, our money will get stolen.
Yes.
And it's going to get stolen for transportation projects that, you know, maybe somebody says clean the air, but they don't get to what we have in the AQMP, and we just have to keep a laser focus on that intention.
Yes, and our AQMP, and Dr. Fine might want to weigh in, because there are components related to transit and transportation. I understand what you're saying, Supervisor.
I just,
you got to keep that focus.
We've got to keep that focus, and the more language you put in the bill, the more opportunity for mischief arises out of Sacramento.
Agreed. We've seen.
I'm
confused.
I'm confused. I need a little help here. So, if this thing is successful and gets passed, does the money come to us directly, or is it put in another pool? Because if it comes to us directly, then Supervisor Rutherford, you're in control, right?
So we met with, I forget the new, it used to be Board of Equalization, it's a spinoff now, but it's a tax people, and they told us that they will collect the tax from the cities and the counties, and then it gets sent to us on a monthly basis. And if it passes and the voters pass it, it takes about 2 months for it to start, and we will be getting it from them directly on a monthly basis. And it could be anywhere between $140, $160, depending on how much.
So I'm trying to follow Supervisor Rutherford's logic, because it sounds logical. How does someone get between that process and the money before it gets to us?
I'm just saying, you know as well as I know that mischief happens in Sacramento. And I can't anticipate all the ways it could happen, but you open the door here by saying, oh, this can be spent on transit and transportation projects, and either in Sacramento or if an outside party is writing the actual measure, that money goes away before we spend it on clean air.
And to that point, it probably should be included in the bill where the money goes, that it comes to the district to determine the spending of it. With cap and trade money, as you may recall, that wasn't originally part of the Global Climate Solutions Act. Then the legislature found out, oh, ARB is getting a lot of money. We're going to create the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. All that money comes to the state, and the state legislature will determine how it is spent. So that's a pathway that can happen if we're not paying attention. So.
And just to respond, there's been some language put in the bill, part of the cleanup, technical cleanup that happened recently, just to ensure that the funding is basically determined and controlled. You know, the uses are determined and approved by the South Coast.
And it's per the AQMP.
Yeah. And so it's going to be come here first, and then it's determined. There may be many opportunities or different kinds of things, and they may be clean transit or transportation related, but it's something that we would have to buy off on first before we use for that.
So
the board would buy off.
This board makes those decisions. Yeah, that should be very clear in the legislation,
It's
though.
gotta be
I think
clear in
Janice is absolutely right on that.
This is giving me more trepidation than I've had in the past, because this is a huge amount of money. And to think that someone could come in and just legislate it away from us, which obviously probably could. I'm sure that gives a number of us trepidation on if this is really the pathway. But Supervisor Perez?
I agree, Dr. Burke, 100%. Let me just state out loud that I think the more specific, detailed we can be with language coming from us, the better. And so let's not leave it all to chance. And Supervisor Rutherford, I hear you as well. So if I can ask staff, let's, if you don't mind, send that bill to all of us so that we can read it, so we can understand the language. And as well, any type of analysis that's been done over the course of this last year, so that we can read that through as well. And then maybe from there, we could be helpful with maybe language that we should put into that bill moving forward. I also want to state that regardless of who our legislator is, it's our bill. I know that sometimes legislators hijack and they call it their own and things happen like that. But at the end of the day, this is coming from us, and some people might say differently against that. But as a former legislator, if you want to be, quite frankly, productive, and you want to make sure that you get an effective and be effective, you got to work with your ground. And so, let's take a look at the language, and if we have a language we want to input into that bill, let's do that, and let's sit down with the legislator and let's make sure that he's aware of that. If not, then we pull the bill. It is what it is.
Yeah, if I can add, Madam Chair, that we have before us two qualified former state legislators who have the knowledge and the ability and the skill to help us craft this effort here and lead this effort. So I say we leverage, both Supervisor Perez and Senator Delgado's connections and relationships, so that we overcome some of those fears and those concerns that have been brought forth by Dr. Burke and Supervisor Rutherford.
Could I just reiterate what Supervisor Perez says? The fact that he hasn't seen this language, the fact that I had to get it from another source, is not right for this committee. This is the legislative committee. And y'all are working on language that is not being run through this committee and that we're not being informed of even after it's been inserted into bills. That is not acceptable.
We will correct that.
Yeah, I think that should be corrected. I get the language off the legislative website.
Yeah.
But you're right, is that the best way for us to be learning about it? And if we're going to go back in February with a new bill, and we're going to have some new language, as you can see from the committee's input here, then let's circulate that to the committee before we go going to Sacramento to lobby it. Also, when it comes to the author, and you all can give me advice on this, is it a good idea to have an author who isn't from the South Coast? Lena Gonzalez is San Diego.
Long Beach. She's Long Beach.
Lena's she's
Loretta.
new.
Is she Long Beach?
Lena's new.
Okay.
She's San Diego.
I'm mistaken.
I mean, not San Diego.
I thought she was San Diego. Isn't she married?
She's actually, she would be great because she's the fourth.
Loretta Gonzalez. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm mixing up my legislators. So I've been
The
corrected.
Gonzalez, yeah, one's an assembly member, one's a senator.
Okay, got it. Yes, but do you all agree with that? That we ought to have somebody who's from the South Coast area that's going to be the author? Okay.
Right, and the senators that were mentioned earlier are from the South Coast.
They're from South Coast.
Mariela.
Okay. Any other comments about this? We've had pretty good discussion with our members here, but we do have some public comment on it. We do have Harvey. You want to speak on items 1, 2, and 3? Harvey?
Harvey. You're up. Item 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, he's getting up.
Harvey at the podium.
Have the podium there, and you'll have 3 minutes on 1, 2, and 3.
Good morning. Happy New Year. My name is Harvey Etter. I'm talking for myself and for the Public Solar Power Coalition. In reference to the governor's concerns about the wildfires and homelessness, climate change is the fires, the future of the investor-owned utilities, and climate change. There's some reset going on. There was a letter sent in the fall by 22 cities and counties, led by the mayor of San Jose, taking away 5 million PG&E users to work setting up solar co-ops, including the city and county of Santa Cruz, where I lived and went to school and worked, and home ownership. There has been for 20 years the home ownership voucher for Section 8. And I've brought this up at boards meetings. And there's the housing, transportation trade-off, people commuting from the IE into the jobs in the city. The city and the county have been doing this, and people that were senior people did not know that these existed. They were trying to get a report together back to the city and the county, and this is going on. It's happening, and it needs to be utilized. There was 40 years ago a refundable solar tax credit for low income, and I talked about it in the study that we did for the PUC 40 years ago. And the example was the low income solar equity program. That we have vertical and horizontally integrated entities, and with housing, they had a $3,000 for a hot water, space heating, and electric, each system. So that was refundable. They didn't have to pay in taxes to get it, and they had $9,000 to put on a down payment for housing. Okay, they're going to build over a million houses here under SCAG in the next 8 years by the end of this decade. This is what we need. The future of the investor-owned utilities, they're on their way out. The climate isn't going, sea level rise, vector increase, all this stuff. That's what's happening. Okay, we're talking basically Silicon Valley doing this, San Jose, all right? And there was a group, okay, I worked on this, and it was in the October issue of the Chronicle.
Thanks,
Okay, thank you, Harvey.
A lot more to say on different things.
Well, we have one more item, and that's just a written report from the Home Rule Advisory Committee. It's a written report, so we won't make any, just take it on receive and file. And then we do have public comment. Any other business to come before the committee? We've discussed it all. Public comment. Is there any public comment? I know, Harvey, you put in a card for public comment.
Yes.
Okay. 3 minutes.
Okay. City of Santa Monica is looking at doing a 9,000. SCAG says they got to do 14,000 units by the end of. This is funded by low-income housing's funded 90% federal tax credits. Hundreds of millions, billions of dollars. This goes to people in the know, okay? Not to those that are homeless. 10 years ago, when the crash happened, stuff went down 10, 20, 30 cents on the dollar. You wouldn't have a homeless problem if it was used this way, okay? $700 billion in the Troubled Asset Relief Fund. Those tax credits need to be put in there so that the low income and middle income can get those credits. There's a market for them where they can use them themselves or not, and to leverage it and to get that equity, to get dignity, a piece of the action, the American dream. All right? I've been homeless 10% of my life. I'm 70. I got hurt working on the pipeline in Alaska, and down here as a locksmith in an auto accident, same stuff. The federal law says that if you're senior or disabled, you don't have to have income requirements. You can have SSI. Something like 10-20% of SSI people own their homes. People don't know this. Maybe in the middle of the country, flyover, or right here in River City. But and it's the jobs, housing, transportation, emissions trade-off, climate change. Everything's got to change now with climate change. I have referred to Naomi Klein's new book. Also, her previous book, This Changes Everything, was purged from the Solar New Deal. It's not in the record, as was the French economist Piketty, who wrote on equity. Both of these were in 14. Both of these books were not included in the record. And when it came to why I chose 18K per hour, there was a moderate oil company and made 26K the CEO per hour. Tax credit, well, stock options and whatnot. This is the real world. It can't continue this way. Continued concentration of wealth in the last 30, 40 years under Reaganomics versus the Keynesian of the 30, 40 years before that. It's on its way out. It does not work. We've got to make changes, and we've got to do them quick. This is what the science is telling us, and we're ignoring it. And the Arctic is melting, and we need to get this before the board and to do research. And if the feds aren't going to do it, they're taking money away up in Alaska, and there's the Arctic Research Council, and this stuff is serious. These numbers were not included in IPCC.
Thank you, Harvey. Is there anyone else? I don't have any more cards. Anyone else who wants to make public comment? Seeing none. Okay. This meeting will be adjourned until Friday, February 14th. Thank you all.